The Drexar didn't conquer planets. They erased them. Every transmission that warned of their approach ended with the same 3 words. Run. They're here. Entire civilizations vanished overnight. No diplomacy, no mercy, just fire from the skies and blackened ruins left behind. And for the longest time, the galaxy did nothing. The Council of 11, made up of the most advanced alien species in the quadrant, chose survival over resistance. Evacuate and retreat, they said. Preserve the knowledge. Wait for the storm to pass. But the storm never passed. It just grew. The Drexar were brutal, insectoid monsters with advanced tech and no interest in anything but dominance. They'd swept across 3 sectors in 4 galactic years, and no one, not even the warrior-class Breck, had slowed them down. That's when the whispers started, about a warship from a forgotten race. A ship built for one thing: to destroy. The humans had been gone for decades. Officially, they were non-compliant primitives with a disturbing love for chaos. Unofficially, they were feared. Rumor said they'd been kicked out of the Galactic Accord for their refusal to disarm. They called it security. The Council called it madness. Humans didn't just fight, they enjoyed it, and so humanity faded from galactic memory. Until the Battle of Kiral IV. Kiral IV was a mid-tier trade planet, nothing special. But it was strategic, and when the Drexar descended, the Council didn't even bother sending help. It was already written off. But that night, the sky changed. Council surveillance drones caught it all. The Drexar mothership, big as a small moon, hovered above the planet, its cannons glowing with pre-fire energy. Below, civilians screamed, trying to reach underground bunkers. Then the scanners glitched, just for a second. Then again, and suddenly, a reading. Classified vessel detected. No origin, no Council ID, nothing. Until it decloaked. It was long, black, and quiet, its silhouette cut through space like a blade. No flashy colors, no translation pings, just one name etched in scarred steel across the hull: HSS Vengeance. The Drexar ship paused, probably confused. Then it charged weapons. The human warship didn't wait. It fired, a single shot, but not from any Council weaponry. This was different, dense, burning, with a sound that rattled bones even through vacuum, the kind of firepower you didn't regulate, the kind you buried deep in forgotten military laws. The Drexar ship flinched, its shields cracked like glass, and then, to everyone's disbelief, it retreated. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the Drexar ran. The footage went viral. The whispers turned into desperate messages. Find the humans. We need them. If they have ships like that. But humans don't answer calls. At least, not politely. The HSS Vengeance didn't send a message. No contact, no communications. It simply vanished back into the black. The Drexar regrouped. They hit twice as hard at Goran Prime, trying to bury the embarrassment. Another planet gone. But there was something different now. Fear. The galaxy had never seen the Drexar fear anything, but they feared that ship. And what the Council didn't know, what no one knew, was that the Vengeance wasn't alone. It was the first. The humans were watching. They had been watching. And now, they were coming back. The Drexar weren't used to losing, especially not to a ship from a species they'd assumed was extinct or too primitive to matter. But after Kiral IV, something in their hive shifted. Their strategists, those grotesque telepathic brains suspended in nutrient tanks, stopped underestimating humanity. They started planning for them. For the Drexar, fear wasn't an emotion. It was an alarm in the hive mind. A signal that screamed unpredictable threat. And unpredictability was something the Drexar couldn't control. That made it dangerous. The Overmind, perched in orbit above the shattered remains of Gorin Prime, summoned every surviving scout, drone, and warbeast to Sector 12, where Kirill 4 had been. The orders were simple: track the human warship, analyze, capture, dissect. They even brought the Reavers, genetically engineered DarkStar assassins bred for only one thing: hunting rare threats. But the humans had already moved on. Out in the dead zone beyond Council-regulated space, the HSS Vengeance drifted in the shadow of a broken moon. Inside, it was nothing like the Council ships, with their smooth curves and ambient lighting. The Vengeance was steel, wires, old battle scars, and flickering lights. The air carried the faint scent of burnt circuits and blood, and at its heart sat Commander Lynn Vale. She wasn't a diplomat. She wasn't a politician. She was war-forged, cut from Earth's last generation of soldiers before they'd gone dark. Her eyes were tired, her voice rasped from years of recycled air and too many bad memories. But her hands? Steady as death. She watched the recordings from Kirill 4 again, not out of pride, but calculation. The shot that pierced the DarkStar mothership's shield had been from their prototype rail core. They only had 2 rounds left. "Any word from Earth?" she asked. Her tactical officer, Jin, looked up from the console. "Still radio silence. HQ's not acknowledging Council transmissions. No change." Vale snorted. "Of course not. Typical." That was the thing about humanity. When the Council kicked them out decades ago, humans didn't beg to stay. They vanished, shut down all beacons, left no trace. They had made a pact. If the galaxy didn't want them, then the galaxy could survive without them. But the galaxy hadn't survived. The Council's peace treaties were worth less than the stars they floated near. Every species had disarmed, grown soft, traded their weapons for philosophy. Humanity didn't. Not completely. Vale stood and walked toward the command deck window. Outside, the stars shimmered cold and distant. Somewhere out there, Earth still spun, still watched, but even she didn't know exactly where, and she wasn't heading back. Not yet. "Commander," Jin said suddenly, urgency in his voice. "We've got a ping. Multiple ships dropping from warp. DarkStar signature." Vale's jaw clenched. "How many?" 14. No mothership, but 1 Reaver class. Heavy recon dot." She smirked. "They're sending dogs to sniff us out." "Orders? Let 'em sniff." The Vengeance didn't cloak this time. It stayed visible, like bait in open space. The DarkStar warships approached, weapons charged. One of them pulsed a warning signal in standard code. "Stand down. Prepare for capture." Vale leaned over the comms. "Jin, play the message." He blinked. "What message?" "The one I recorded after Kirill 4. He nodded, tapped a few keys. A distorted human voice crackled across the battlefield, angry, tired, and clear. "To the DarkStar Overmind, you wanted to conquer. You should have checked under the bed before waking the monster. You want war? You just found it." And then she cut comms. "Fire," Vale said. The Vengeance lit up. Railcore round number 2 screamed through the black and smashed straight through the DarkStar Reaver ship, splitting it in half like a melon under a hammer. The shockwave tore 2 others apart. The remaining ships scattered, but Vale wasn't chasing. She didn't have the ammo for that. She wanted them to run, let them report back, let the Overmind know. Humans weren't just back, they were hunting. The DarkStar didn't retreat often. It wasn't part of their nature. But when the fractured remains of their recon fleet limped back to the Overmind, something inside the hive shifted again. This time more urgently, more chaotically. The humans were real, they were dangerous, and worse, they were unpredictable. The Overmind issued an emergency override across its fleet clusters. It paused the next wave of planetary assaults and instead focused its full computational force on one question. Where had the humans gone all these years? That answer wasn't in any council archives. It wasn't on any trade route logs or alliance charts. Humanity hadn't just disappeared. They'd buried themselves under myths and fear. Even the council didn't know what had really happened. They assumed humanity had fractured, maybe gone extinct after their exile. But the truth? The truth was hidden on a scorched little planet at the edge of an unmarked system, Earth. Beneath layers of dust and silence, Earth had evolved in secret. After being exiled by the Council, human leaders made a brutal decision. They cut all communication, burned the satellites, shut down deep space relays. They didn't want to be found, not until they were ready. And ready they had become. The surface of Earth was a wasteland. On purpose, a decoy, a message to any curious observer that humanity had collapsed. But buried deep beneath old continents, in caverns reinforced with neutronium steel, was the Cradle, a subterranean complex that spanned half a hemisphere. Here, humanity thrived. They trained, researched, built weapons not even the Council could imagine. They engineered warships like the Vengeance. Few, yes, but lethal. And most importantly, they remembered. Every DarkStar attack across the galaxy had been monitored, catalogued, analyzed. Humanity had never truly disappeared. They'd watched from the shadows, building weapons while the rest of the galaxy disarmed itself in the name of peace. They knew this day would come, the day when someone like the DarkStar would see weakness and come for everything. And now that day was here. Inside the Cradle, the highest-ranking officials of Earth's hidden military stood around a glowing table, staring at a simulation of the galaxy. Red zones, DarkStar-occupied territories, were spreading like a virus. But now, blinking in the middle of the black, was a small blue dot. The Vengeance. Commander Vale made contact, General Reeves said. He was an old warhawk with cybernetic lungs and half a face made of war-grade chrome. Successful engagement? She sent the message. And the Council? Asked Minister Tari, head of strategic diplomacy, though diplomacy hadn't been useful for a long time. Still silent, Reeves said, or too scared to admit they need us. A pause. Then Tari leaned forward, voice low. It's time, isn't it? Reeves nodded. Yes. No more shadows. No more hiding. The Drexer picked a fight with the wrong species. Activate the fleet. At once, alarms rang softly throughout the Cradle. Hangars the size of cities roared to life. Massive warships long thought scrapped or destroyed powered up, their cores thrumming like sleeping gods awakening. One by one, names lit up on a massive screen above the operations deck: HSS Retribution, HSS Warlord, HSS Ghost Hammer, HSS Final Dawn, and dozens more. Each vessel was piloted by Earth's finest, soldiers trained not for defense, but extinction-level war. These weren't peacekeepers, they were Avengers. Meanwhile, Commander Vale aboard the Vengeance received a priority encrypted signal. She read the blinking words and felt her stomach twist. Not in fear, but anticipation. You're not alone anymore. Fleet en route. She leaned back in her chair, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. Let's see how the Drexer handle round 2. But out in the stars, the Drexer weren't idle. The Overmind had already shifted its strategies. No more scouts, no more probing. It would bring its full strength, all hives, all ships. It would swarm Earth before the humans could gather, because deep inside the Drexer collective, a fear they'd never known had taken root, the kind of fear that only humans could inspire. Space had never been quiet, but now it screamed. Sensors across the galaxy lit up as the Drexer made their move. Thousands of warships emerged from void rifts, Wormhole-like tears in space they carved open using stolen energy from dying stars. These weren't scout fleets anymore. These were extermination hives. Their target wasn't a council world. It wasn't a trade hub. It was Earth. The Overmind had learned that humanity wasn't some forgotten species clinging to ancient tech. They had planned, evolved, and trained in isolation. And now that the HSS Vengeance had exposed them again, the hive mind had come to one conclusion: eliminate the source before it spreads. The DarkStar swarm approached like a tidal wave of living steel, unfeeling, unrelenting, and impossibly vast. But they were already too late. Earth's moon shifted. It wasn't a moon, not anymore. It hadn't been since the humans turned it into Lunabase 1, a disguised orbital defense fortress. Its surface split open, revealing colossal weapon batteries. Entire continents of automated missile silos rotated into position. From deep beneath Earth's surface, dozens of warships launched, hidden for decades, cloaked, waiting for this moment. They weren't as big as the DarkStar hive ships. They didn't need to be. They were human ships, each one designed to punch holes in celestial bodies, each one piloted by people who grew up training for this. Commander Vale, now flanked by 2 more human cruisers, received her combat orders: delay the swarm until Earth's main fleet arrives. "Great," she muttered, tapping the cracked console. 3 ships against a space plague." "Better odds than usual," Jin grinned. The Vengeance turned toward the incoming DarkStar advance. With its railcores now reloaded and weapon capacitors at full charge, it dove straight into the black. The first DarkStar ship to engage them, a razor-winged Harvester class, never even fired. The Vengeance's railcore burned a molten hole straight through its thorax. "2 more coming up from starboard," Jin shouted. "Let 'em," Vale replied. The 2 human support ships, the HSS Emberclaw and HSS Warden, peeled off and cut clean through the enemy's flank. Human ship design prioritized forward-facing brute force and brutal maneuverability. They didn't dance in space like council vessels. They brawled, they bullied. The DarkStar weren't used to being hit this hard. One of their hive ships, bristling with cannonous turrets and acidic breachers, launched a full assault on Earth's atmosphere. But it never made it. From Lunabase 1, Heaven's Spear activated. A prototype orbital rail weapon, it was capable of firing a solid tungsten rod at half the speed of light. It only needed 1 shot. The spear tore through space, struck the hive ship dead center, and didn't stop. It kept going, ripping through 2 more DarkStar vessels before vanishing into deep space. The result? 3 destroyed ships and silence across the swarm's neural network. A sudden pause, a gap, an emotion, confusion, fear. Down below, on Earth's command deck, General Reeves watched the battle unfold. Every instinct in his war-wired brain screamed, "Press the advantage." "Launch full fleet," he ordered. "All units, no more secrets. We go loud." Across Earth and its orbit, 100 warships jumped into battle. No cloaks, no stealth. Their arrival was thunder in space. Fire rained from the stars. Human ships didn't glide. They charged. Inside the swarm, something faltered. The DarkStar Overmind recalculated. Humanity wasn't isolated anymore. They weren't fractured. They were unified, disciplined, and worst of all, they knew how to win. It sent out a distress ping across its network, a signal meant only for the ancient DarkStar warcast. Being so violent, they'd been locked away, even from their own hive, for fear they'd devour the swarm itself. The Overmind didn't care anymore. It would rather risk its own collapse than lose to the humans. But humans weren't finished either. The HSS Retribution, Earth's largest warship, jumped into orbit. It was the size of a small city and dark as a funeral ship, with 1 word glowing across its armored side: Never again. Commander Vale watched it appear on her scopes and whispered, "Well, well, looks like the old bastards brought the big guns." The Drexer had come to destroy Earth, but Earth wasn't a planet anymore. It was a weapon. They came from the void between stars, the ancient ones, the Drexer's last gamble, the war cast. Even the Overmind trembled when it awakened them. Not out of fear. Fear was a luxury it didn't possess, but out of cold, hive-level logic. These were not ships. These were living weapons bred during the Drexer's earliest conquests, back when the galaxy still burned fresh with the ashes of their first victims. They had no names, no language, just a command: destroy. While most Drexar vessels resembled jagged metal fused with biotech, the Warcast ships were something else entirely, alive in every sense. Each one was a colossal biomechanical beast, the size of moons, wrapped in muscle, bone armor, and void ink skin that shimmered with unnatural color. Eyes pulsed along their hulls, limbs clawed at space itself as they moved. Inside them lived the oldest, most violent instincts of the swarm, and now they were coming for Earth. On the command deck of the HSS Retribution, General Reeves watched the long-range scans and didn't speak for a long time. Around him, officers shifted nervously. Even hardened veterans stared at the readings with pale faces. "Are we looking at a planet?" one finally asked. "No," Reeves said flatly. "That's not a planet. That's a monster." Across the fleet, battle readiness went to max. Shield matrices charged, cannon arrays locked into target mode, and all human ships repositioned in a massive arc around Earth's orbit. The plan was simple: hold the line. But no one underestimated what was coming. Commander Vale, now docked temporarily on the Retribution, stood shoulder to shoulder with Reeves, watching the visual feed as one of the Warcast broke through a starfield like a serpent from hell. It didn't warp. It ripped through space, jaws first, shrieking across frequencies not meant for any mind to hear. "Sir," Jin called through comms from the Vengeance, still in orbit. "The Drexer just dropped one of their own ships. The Warcast devoured it." Vale hissed through her teeth. "Even the swarm can't control them." "They don't want to," Reeves muttered. "They just want Earth broken before the humans unite the galaxy." And that's exactly what had started happening. Across Council space, alien species that once turned their backs on humanity were watching Earth's defense in disbelief. Some sent messages, others sent ships. Nothing coordinated yet. But something was shifting. The galaxy was starting to rally. But Earth couldn't wait. Not with those things inbound. As the first Warcast entity neared orbit, Earth's planetary defense grid fired everything: railguns, plasma barrages, EMP lances. But nothing slowed it. The creature twisted mid-space, absorbing energy through layered void flesh and firing back. Not missiles, not lasers. It roared. A deep, subspace growl that ruptured 2 human ships from the inside. The Vengeance, still holding in lower orbit, took a near hit. Hull integrity dropped to 41%. Inside, sparks flew as consoles overloaded. Jin was thrown against the wall, blood streaking his cheek. Vale gritted her teeth and slammed her fist on the panel. "Get us back in the air!" Another shriek from the Warcast, and one of Earth's orbital towers split in half, metal and fire raining down toward the Pacific. Then came the Retribution's moment. "Target locked," the gunnery officer called out. Reeves gave the word. The Retribution's main cannon fired its judgment core, a super-dense fusion shell encased in quantum foam. The recoil alone cracked part of its aft spine. But the result? Impact. The Warcast shrieked again, but this time in pain. Real pain. The shell tore through 3 of its limbs and embedded itself deep into its torso, where it began to detonate internally. The creature thrashed, pulling debris and even smaller DarkStar ships into its gravity. But it didn't die. It just turned, right toward Earth, right toward the retribution. It was coming, and this time it wasn't roaring. It was charging. Vale stepped forward. "Get me back on the Vengeance. We've still got the last railcore round." Reeves looked at her. "That thing's a nightmare. You won't survive that run." She smirked. "Wasn't planning to." He paused, then gave a stiff nod. "Make it count." The Vengeance limped through low orbit, its hull scorched, one engine flickering like a dying star. Every system groaned as Commander Vale climbed back onto the bridge, blood trailing down her forearm, eyes locked on the growing shadow ahead. The Warcast entity was so massive now it blocked the sun. Every sensor screamed warnings. It wasn't just alive, it was angry. Chunks of torn DarkStar ships still floated around its limbs, like trophies from the swarm it devoured. Earth's fleet kept firing, hammering it with every weapon in range, but it kept coming. Flesh regenerating, bones shifting mid-flight, eyes along its body blinking in patterns no one could decipher. It was headed straight for the retribution. "Where are we on railcore power?" Vale asked, dropping into her command chair. Jin wiped blood off his forehead, voice shaking. "We've got just enough charge for one shot, that's it." She nodded. "Then we don't miss." "Commander," he hesitated, "if we fire this close, recoil could rip us in half." Vale didn't blink. "If we don't fire, that thing tears Earth in half." The Vengeance powered forward, pushing every last drop of energy into acceleration. They needed line of sight for the shot, and that meant getting dangerously close. Too close. Inside the Warcast, ancient biological systems reacted. Spines emerged from its flanks. Chitin cannons lit up, preparing to fire. "Weapons incoming!" Jin yelled. Vale didn't flinch. "Full shields forward. Divert all non-essential systems." "You mean life support?" "Yup." The Vengeance surged through the debris field. One DarkStar pod clipped their wing. Another burst against their shield. Fire raged through the lower deck, but no one stopped. Every crew member knew what this was. It wasn't a mission. It was a suicide charge. "Locked on," Jin gasped. "We have a shot." Vale stood up. The creature's central eye opened wide, pupil glowing like a singularity. She could feel it looking at her. Not the ship, her. She leaned over the comms, sent one final message to the retribution. "Commander Vale of the HSS Vengeance, engaging final shot. If this doesn't work, burn everything. Do not let this thing reach Earth." And then she turned to Jin. "Fire!" The railcore screamed. The weapon drew energy from the ship's spine, cracked the deck, bent the Vengeance's structure nearly in half, then fired a solid ferromass slug wrapped in magnetoplasma, a weapon so dense it nearly broke gravity as it passed. The slug struck the Warcast dead in the central eye. A silence followed. Not the kind that was peaceful, but the kind that comes just before something explodes. Then it hit. The eye shattered like brittle glass. Inside, energy surged out like a supernova caught in a cage. The beast thrashed, shrieking across every known frequency. Lightning arced from its limbs, its body folded inward, the way a dying star collapses into itself. "Get us out of here," Vale yelled. "Engines are fried." They didn't escape, not entirely. The shockwave hit them head-on. The Vengeance spun out, spiraling, hull tearing open. The last thing Vale saw was the flames reaching for the bridge. Then, darkness. Back on Earth, the Retribution tracked the Warcast's vitals, what little they could understand of it, and after 30 agonizing seconds, flatline. The Warcast entity was dead. Humanity had done what no species in the galaxy had managed to do. They had killed a god. The Retribution's comms flared to life with static. A garbled voice broke through. Is Commander Vale still alive?" The bridge crew fell silent. Reeves leaned in, heart hammering. "Repeat that. Is she alive?" The signal crackled, then clear. "Still breathing. Ship's gone. But I'm not." Against all odds, Vale had survived. A single escape pod floated among the wreckage of the Vengeance, burnt, twisted, but intact. The humans pulled her in. She awoke hours later in a medical bay, tubes in her arms, pain in every cell of her body. Reeves sat nearby, expression unreadable. "You did it," he said quietly. Vale winced. "Told you I wouldn't miss." Then she passed out again. And outside, above Earth, the stars were quiet. For now, the warcast was dead. The stars had gone quiet. But silence never meant peace. It just meant everyone was listening now. Within hours of the Vengeance's final strike, the once silent Galactic Council came scrambling back to the table like panicked diplomats after a bar fight they pretended never started. Holosignals poured into Earth's outer systems, pleas for negotiation, offers of support, carefully worded apologies that danced around their decades of abandonment. Earth answered none of them. They didn't have to. Because the galaxy had just witnessed something no treaty, alliance, or diplomatic resolution had ever achieved. A Drexer warcast had fallen. Not by Council forces, not by some miracle, but by a single, forgotten species they had labeled too aggressive to integrate. Now those same aggressors were the only reason half the galaxy still existed. Commander Vale, still recovering in the medbay aboard the Retribution, woke to find her room filled with officers. General Reeves stood near the door, arms folded, jaw clenched. She blinked through the haze of painkillers. "What? No flowers?" she rasped. "You've got 37 species requesting interviews," Reeves said dryly, "and the Council wants to offer you their highest honor." Vale tried to sit up, but winced. "They can shove it? I didn't save the galaxy for a pin in a speech." "We figured you'd say that." "What about the Drexer?" Reeves's face darkened. "The rest of the swarm is pulling back. That railcore shot. It did more than kill a warcast. It scared them. For the first time in their history, they're retreating, reorganizing." Vale narrowed her eyes. "Which means they'll be back." Reeves nodded. "With more. Worse." She exhaled slowly. "Then we need to be ready." That was the new conversation now. Not, can humanity defend itself, but who will lead the galaxy into war? Across Council space, unrest was boiling. Species once loyal to the Council had begun sending envoys to Earth instead. Trade offers, military alliances. The Brake warriors even proposed joint combat training, admitting, publicly, that humans had outmatched them. One by one, the Council's credibility was crumbling. And in its place, humanity was rising, not as conquerors, but as the last reliable wall between survival and extinction. At Earth Command, the debates began. Some leaders wanted to seize the moment, break the Council completely and form a human-led galactic coalition. Others warned of repeating the mistakes of the old empires. Vale was summoned to the War Council 3 days after she woke. Her body still ached. Her left arm was wrapped in a neurobandage, and every step made her ribs scream. But when she entered the chamber, everyone stood. Even Reeves. She didn't waste time. "We're not politicians," she said. "We don't need medals, and we're not here to wave flags. We're still at war." A screen lit up behind her, showing the latest scans from deep space. 3 more warcast readings, all moving, all hungry. "The Drexer aren't finished. They're learning, evolving. The Overmind won't make the same mistake twice." The room went quiet. She stepped forward, voice harder now. If the galaxy wants peace, it's going to have to fight for it. Not with treaties, not with silence, but with action. Earth stood alone and won. Imagine what we could do together. Reeves stepped in beside her. The question now isn't who leads, it's who's still willing to fight. Messages from alien factions flooded the comms that day. Not just messages of support, but enlistment requests. Pilots from Tau Ceti, strategists from the Oraun, even council defectors were offering intelligence. For the first time, humanity wasn't the outsider. They were the center. But somewhere, far beyond charted space, in the Drexer's hidden hive worlds, the Overmind had begun creating something worse than the Warcast, something bigger, something meant to erase not just Earth, but memory of it. And it was already moving. The Overmind had one final card to play. In the cold, ancient void beyond mapped space, where suns died without ever having been named, it stirred awake its deepest nightmare, the only weapon it had sealed away even from itself. It was called the Hollow Star. Not a ship, not a beast, not even a warcast. It was a planet-sized hive, built in secret across millennia, wrapped in living Drexer flesh and armor fused with the remains of consumed civilizations. Inside it, billions of dormant soldiers pulsed beneath blackened crust, while its core burned with the neural network of 100 Overmind fragments stitched together into a singular, thinking god. The Hollow Star didn't move like a fleet. It devoured systems. And it was heading straight for Earth. Back on Earth, the war alarms echoed across every continent for the first time since the first Exodus. The Retribution, and what remained of the fleet, were already at half strength from the Warcast battle, and yet the new threat was orders of magnitude greater. But this time, humanity wasn't alone. In Earth orbit, a new kind of fleet had assembled. The banner didn't bear Earth's flag. It didn't carry the Council's either. It bore a symbol newly minted, a white star split with a red line, the sign of the unified resistance. Humans, Bruke, Oraun, a dozen other species, once fractured, now stood as one. No more hiding, no more waiting. At the center of the formation, Commander Vale stood once again on a rebuilt bridge of the Vengeance 2, her old crew at her side. The original ship had burned. She hadn't. And now she was leading the entire damn galaxy. She opened comms to the Allied fleet. "This is Commander Vale. You've all seen what they did. Planets burned, people erased. This is our last stand. But it's not about Earth. It's about the idea that no species gets to be erased without a fight. We draw the line here. We hold the line now. Make them regret thinking we'd stay silent." The Hollow Star emerged from dark space on the edge of Sol's system, eclipsing the distant light of Neptune. Even from millions of kilometers away, its presence was overwhelming. Planet-sized tendrils reached outward. Lightning crawled along its crust like veins. It spoke into every mind it touched, alien, human, synthetic, with a single echoing command: submit. But no one did. The resistance hit it with everything, wave after wave of coordinated fire, from the Retribution's Judgment Core to Breck plasma spears to alien EMP webs that crackled across its shield skin. The Hollow Star responded by opening its maw. Ships vanished, dozens in a blink. Entire squadrons were swallowed whole, but they kept fighting. Vale led a break formation directly toward the core. "This thing isn't alive," she told her crew. "It's not even a planet, it's a tomb. Let's bury it." Inside the Hollow Star, the Overmind's collective thoughts began to fracture. It hadn't expected resistance on this scale, not from them. The humans, the irrational ones, the stubborn ones. The ones who, when told to die, stood up and said, no. And then, like a pulse through space itself, came Earth's final move. A prototype weapon long held in reserve, a failsafe, a gift from a dying scientist who once warned the Council they'd regret ignoring the primitive species, The Soul Lance, a beam weapon powered by the sun's own corona. It fired. Straight through the Vengeance 2's opening created by Vale's attack squad, the beam tore into the Hollow Star's neural core. The feedback screamed through space as overmind fragments began collapsing in on themselves. The beast wailed, not in audio, not in sound, but in gravitational distortions that bent light and space around it, and then it imploded. The Hollow Star caved in, crumpling like a dying sun, vanishing into a black maw of its own making. Silence followed. True silence. No warcast, no swarm, no voice in their minds demanding surrender. Just a galaxy looking at Earth, now the last wall between them and oblivion, and realizing what had just happened. Commander Vale, bloodied, exhausted, barely holding herself upright, stared out the viewport of the Vengeance 2. "It's over," Jin whispered. She didn't respond right away, just stared into the dark. "No," she finally said. "It's just beginning." Because peace wasn't the absence of war. It was the promise that if war ever came again, humanity would be waiting. The Galactic Council Chamber was a marvel of architecture, a floating citadel of diplomacy suspended in the cold void of space. It was where the most powerful races of the universe gathered, where empires were born and fell, and where wars were decided with words instead of weapons. For centuries, humanity had fought to earn its place among the elder races. Against all odds, they had climbed from being dismissed as a primitive, warlike species to holding a coveted seat at the council. They were the youngest race ever admitted, a race of survivors, innovators, and, some would argue, troublemakers. But now, in a single vote, everything had changed. The chamber was filled with the murmurs of alien delegates as the ruling verdict was announced. The Speaker of the Council, a towering insectoid being with shimmering golden carapace, clicked its mandibles as it read the decision aloud. "By unanimous vote, the human species is hereby expelled from the Galactic Council. Effective immediately, all human embassies and representatives are to be recalled. The Terran Coalition is stripped of all diplomatic privileges." Silence followed. A silence so thick it felt like the vacuum of space itself. Then a slow, sharp exhale cut through the stillness. Ambassador Julian Carter, the highest-ranking human in the council, stood frozen at his podium. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the edges. He had expected resistance, maybe even sanctions, but complete expulsion? This was a declaration of exile. His voice was cold steel when he spoke. "On what grounds?" The speaker's multifaceted eyes blinked in unison. "Humanity has displayed repeated acts of aggression, territorial expansion, and defiance of council decrees. Your race has proven itself disruptive to the galactic order." Julian scoffed. "Disruptive?" He looked around the chamber at the gathered species, some with fur, some with scales, others with bioluminescent flesh that pulsed like a heartbeat. "We bled in your wars. We traded fairly. We honored our commitments. And now you cast us aside because we refuse to be subservient?" A reptilian delegate from the Auric Dominion let out a low hiss. "Humans do not follow the Council's will. They build weapons beyond our restrictions, colonize planets outside their assigned zones, and interfere in conflicts that do not concern them." Julian's jaw tightened. "We defend ourselves. We defend those who are too weak to fight for themselves." His gaze swept across the room, landing on the representatives of races that humanity had helped liberate from oppression. The Ashari, the Vorthans, none of them spoke now. Fear ruled them. The speaker made a dismissive gesture. "Your presence disrupts the balance. Therefore, it is decided. The decision is final." Julian's breathing was steady, but his blood boiled. He had spent a lifetime working to keep humanity in the Council, believing diplomacy was the path to survival. But now he saw the truth. The Council had never wanted humanity as equals. They wanted humans in chains or not at all. Slowly he straightened his suit, smoothing out imaginary wrinkles. He looked up at the assembly with calm defiance. "Very well," he said. "Humanity will leave." The speaker nodded. "Then the matter is settled." Julian turned to go but stopped at the threshold. He glanced back over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "You think you've won today? That by pushing us out you've contained us?" His voice was quiet, but it carried across the chamber like a distant thunderstorm. "You don't realize what you've done." A pause. "You have just freed humanity from every treaty, every limitation, every law that bound us." Silence fell over the chamber once more. Julian gave a slow, sharp smile. "Now, we decide our own fate, and soon, we'll decide yours." With that, he walked out. The Council had cast humanity aside, thinking they were cutting off a problem. They had only created their greatest threat. Julian Carter stepped onto the shuttle that would take him back to the human embassy. Though after the Council's decision, it was no longer an embassy, but just another building waiting to be seized. He barely noticed the polished floors beneath his boots, or the cold efficiency of the ship's interior. His mind was elsewhere. As the doors sealed shut, his aide, a sharp-eyed woman named Lieutenant Sarah Kwan, folded her arms. "That went about as well as expected." Julian exhaled sharply. "I should have seen it coming sooner. The signs were there, the restrictions, the constant votes against us, the so-called sanctions. This wasn't a trial, it was an execution." Sarah leaned against the bulkhead. "So what now?" Julian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared out of the viewport as the shuttle disengaged from the Council station. The endless black of space stretched before them, but it no longer felt like the void of exile. It felt like a frontier. Finally, he turned to her. "We go home. We tell them exactly what happened." His voice hardened. "And then we prepare." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For the moment the Council realizes they just made the worst mistake in galactic history." The return to Earth was met with outrage. The broadcast of the Council's decision spread like wildfire across the colonies, the megacities of Terra and the outer human settlements. The news wasn't just about expulsion, it was about betrayal. The politicians were furious. The generals were livid. The people? They were beyond anger. For years, humanity had played by the rules, believing they could prove themselves. They had bled and sacrificed, thinking they could earn respect. But the moment the elder races felt threatened, they had cut humanity loose like an inconvenient problem. That was their first mistake. Within days, the Terran Coalition's leadership convened in a war room deep beneath Earth's surface. It was an emergency session, but unlike past diplomatic meetings, this one had no talk of negotiation or reconciliation. President Evelyn Ward, a woman known for her ice-cold pragmatism, stood at the head of the table. "The Council thinks they've contained us," she said, voice measured but firm. "They believe that by exiling humanity they've defanged us. I say we prove them wrong." Across from her, Admiral Tobias Grant, a grizzled veteran of the Orion conflict, let out a low chuckle. "They wanted us to stay in our lane. I say we build our own damn highway." Julian leaned forward. "The Council relied on us. Our technology, our industrial might, our willingness to innovate where they feared change. Now, they think they can do without us." He let the weight of his words settle. "They're wrong." The room was silent for a moment. Then, Evelyn nodded. "Then it's settled. We will no longer abide by Council treaties, trade restrictions, or military limitations." She met the eyes of every leader in the room. From this moment on, humanity does not answer to the Council. We answer only to ourselves. The declaration spread like a shockwave. Humanity had just declared total independence from the galactic order, and the galaxy had no idea what was coming next. Back in the core worlds of the Council, news of humanity's response caused a different kind of ripple. The elder races had expected protests, anger, maybe even some posturing. They had not expected humanity to go silent for weeks, and then re-emerge with something terrifying. The first sign that the Terran coalition was not backing down came when the Trade Guild reported the sudden disappearance of human-built ships from Council-controlled space. Entire fleets of industrial freighters, scientific research vessels, and deep space surveyors had simply vanished. At first, the Council thought this was a retreat, a quiet surrender. They were wrong. On the edge of Council space, in the lawless systems beyond their control, humanity had begun something new. A war machine was being built. For decades, the Council had kept humanity's military potential suppressed, limiting fleet sizes, restricting weapons research, and ensuring no one species could challenge their authority. But now, with those restrictions gone, humanity was free to evolve as they saw fit. And humans, when left to their own devices, had one unparalleled talent. They adapted. No longer shackled by outdated treaties, human engineers began developing new ship designs, ones that ignored the Council's outdated doctrines. Where other species relied on traditional shield generators, humanity pushed forward with kinetic barrier systems, miniaturized warp drives, and self-repairing hull plating. The first prototype Dreadnought rolled off the assembly line 6 months later. It was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Heavily armored, brutally efficient, and armed with weapons that ignored Council-standard defense systems, it was not just a battleship. It was a message that humanity would never be controlled again. And soon, the Council would learn that firsthand. The first sign of humanity's return to the galactic stage wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a fleet parked in orbit over a Council world. It was silence. For months, humanity had withdrawn from the usual interstellar trade routes. Their colonies went dark, communication hubs stopped transmitting, and even black market channels, once filled with human-made goods, dried up overnight. The Council expected this to be the last stage of humanity's defiance, sulking in exile, waiting for an opportunity to beg for re-entry. Instead, something far worse happened. The Council's reliance on human technology became painfully obvious within weeks. Despite their restrictions, humanity had become the backbone of several key industries. Shipbuilding efficiency dropped across multiple core worlds, as human-engineered assembly techniques had been quietly integrated into galactic infrastructure. Automated medical systems, many based on human-developed nanotechnology, began to fail without access to Terran research. Even the simple but effective supply chains built with human efficiency started to break down. It was like a virus had entered the veins of the galaxy, not a biological one, but an economic one. And the true impact had yet to be seen. Deep within a human-controlled system, far beyond the reach of the Council's oversight, an underground military research station floated above the planet of Kessera IV. It was one of dozens of hidden facilities that had emerged in the wake of humanity's exile. Inside, some of the brightest human minds worked without restrictions. No more bureaucratic red tape, no more diplomatic oversight, no more elder species telling them what was ethical or acceptable. Dr. Hadrian Voss, lead scientist of the Experimental Warfare Division, stood in front of a vast display screen, his fingers tracing over complex energy signatures. His audience, military leaders, engineers, and political figures, watched with interest. "We were forced to play by their rules for too long," Voss said, adjusting his glasses. "Forced to suppress our technological advancements, but now?" He smiled. "Now, we can truly evolve." The screen flickered to life, showing a sleek, predatory warship, something unlike the bulky, standardized vessels the Council used. Its hull was dark, designed for stealth. Its weapons systems were unlike anything the Council had ever seen. "We call it the Revenant-class battleship," Voss continued. "It doesn't rely on traditional energy shielding. Instead, it uses an adaptive plating system that absorbs incoming fire and redistributes the energy to its own weapons." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Admiral Tobias Grant leaned forward. "And the prototype?" Voss's grin widened. "Already operational." The first battle wasn't a battle at all. A lone Revenant-class warship entered a Council-controlled system under the cover of darkness. It didn't broadcast any signals. It didn't announce itself. It simply arrived. And then, without warning, an entire Council patrol fleet went dark. No distress calls, no debris, no survivors. The Council's response was immediate. A task force was dispatched to investigate. But when they arrived, all they found was an empty void, no sign of the missing ships. It was the beginning of a terrifying realization. Humanity was no longer fighting for a seat at the table. They were preparing to flip the table over. The Council's leaders gathered in an emergency session, their voices raised in panic. The disappearances, the economic disruptions, the growing rumors that humanity had developed weapons far beyond their control. It was all spiraling too fast. "We need to re-establish control," a Zalari ambassador snapped, his long serpentine tail twitching with frustration. "Humanity cannot be allowed to operate outside our oversight." "They're already beyond our oversight," a Vorthon general growled. "We thought we were exiling them. Instead, we've created an enemy that has no reason to hold back." The Speaker of the Council, for the first time in his long life, felt fear. It was no longer a question of whether humanity would return to the galactic stage. It was a question of how much destruction they would leave in their wake when they did. And then, as if the universe itself wanted to answer that question, an alert blared across the chamber. A human fleet had just appeared on the Council's border, not in secrecy, not in hiding. This time, they wanted to be seen. And the message was clear. The exiles had returned. The Council border world of Vena 3 had long been considered an unshakable stronghold. A fortress planet, its orbital defenses were among the most advanced in the galaxy. Shielded stations, anti-ship batteries, and fleets of patrol cruisers ensured that no enemy force could ever breach its defenses. But for all its might, it was built for conventional threats. And humanity was no longer a conventional enemy. The Revenant-class battleships did not arrive in grand formations, nor did they challenge the Council to a fair fight. They didn't need to. Instead, they slipped past long-range sensors like ghosts, their adaptive plating rendering them invisible to traditional scanning technology. When the attack came, it wasn't with a barrage of heavy cannons or fleet engagements. It started with silence. A single warning beacon flickered out. Then another. And another. By the time Vena 3's defense command realized something was wrong, they had already lost half their early warning systems. Admiral Sarek, a hardened veteran of the Council's many wars, stood rigid in the command center, his frilled crest rising in agitation. "Report!" he barked. One of his officers, a pale-skinned Aelari, swallowed hard. "Sir, we're losing contact with our outer patrols. No distress signals, no wreckage, just nothing." Sarek's claws tapped against the console. "No fleet movements? No warp signatures?" The officer hesitated. "There was something. Brief distortions, almost like—" The lights flickered. The sound of Vena 3's orbital alarm screamed through the station. Then the first explosion came, not from outside the station, but from within. Sarek barely had time to register what was happening before the station trembled under a direct impact. The view screens lit up with reports of internal fires, breached corridors, and weapons systems shutting down. "How?" he roared. "Where is the enemy?" No answer came, because the enemy was already inside. Humanity had learned from its wars on Earth, from centuries of asymmetric combat and insurgencies. They knew that brute force wasn't always the answer, that sometimes the best way to destroy an empire wasn't with fleets and armies, it was with precision. The first phase of the attack had been an infiltration. Small, undetectable stealth pods had latched onto key stations in the Vena 3 defense network days before the attack. Elite human operatives, trained in zero-G warfare, had breached the stations in silence, disabling security, planting sabotage charges, and hijacking control systems. By the time the Council fleet realized they were under attack, they were already crippled. The second phase was pure, calculated destruction. With Vena 3's defenses in chaos, the Revenant battleships finally revealed themselves. Their dark hulls shimmered as they dropped their stealth fields, weapons systems coming to life with terrifying efficiency. Instead of firing traditional energy-based weapons, they unleashed hyper-accelerated kinetic rounds, slugs the size of small ships, traveling at near relativistic speeds. Council shielding, designed for plasma and laser warfare, proved useless. Ships were torn apart in seconds, their hulls crumpling like tin under the sheer force of the impacts. Defense stations detonated as precision strikes targeted their reactors. Admiral Sarek could only watch in horror as his unshakable stronghold fell apart piece by piece. And then the final blow came, a single transmission broadcast across every channel, Julian Carter's voice. "This is not an invasion. This is not a conquest. This is a reminder." His tone was calm, steady, deadly. "You exiled us. You cast us aside like we were nothing. Now, you will learn what it means to truly be nothing." The transmission cut, and Vena 3's central command station erupted in a fireball that could be seen from orbit. The Council received the news in stunned silence. Vena 3, a fortress world, had been dismantled in a single night. No drawn-out battle, no desperate last stand, just pure, surgical annihilation. For the first time in centuries, the Council leaders realized something terrifying. Humanity was not just returning. They were hunting. And the rest of the galaxy was next. The Galactic Council had never known fear. For thousands of years, they had ruled through diplomacy, trade, and, when necessary, military intervention. The lesser species obeyed, the greater empires coexisted, and the balance of power remained intact. Until now. The attack on Vena 3 had shattered their illusion of control. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Supply lines collapsing, colonies going silent, entire fleets vanishing into the void. The humans weren't waging war like any species before them. They were erasing their enemies before they could even fight back. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall, the Council's ruling members sat in grim silence. The air was thick with tension, a mixture of fear and disbelief. The speaker, his golden carapace dulled with stress, scanned the room. This cannot continue." His voice lacked its usual authority. "We must re-establish control." An Auric Dominion warlord slammed his fist against the table. "Control? Do you understand what we are facing? They are striking without warning. They are fighting like no species we have ever encountered. We need to retaliate before they carve us apart." A Vorthon ambassador bared his fangs. "They fight like cornered animals. We should crush them before they grow bolder." The room erupted into arguments. Some called for all-out war, others for immediate peace talks. But for the first time in history, none of them truly believed they had the upper hand. And then The doors opened. A lone figure entered, a shadow against the grand chandeliers and golden walls of the assembly hall. Admiral Sarek. He was one of the few survivors of Vena III. His once pristine uniform was torn and burned, his left arm bandaged from plasma burns. He walked with a limp, but his eyes were filled with something even deadlier than pain. Understanding. He knew what they were up against. When he spoke, the entire chamber fell silent. "You think this is a war," he said. His voice was hoarse but steady. "It is not." The speaker hesitated. "Then, what is it?" Sarek exhaled, his frilled crest flattened, a sign of weariness. "A reckoning." Across the galaxy, humanity continued its silent conquest. They didn't launch grand invasions. They didn't occupy planets or demand surrender. They simply removed obstacles. Key military outposts fell in single strikes. Supply chains collapsed as human black ops teams sabotaged critical industries. Council spies were fed false information, led into traps, and eliminated before they could report back. The humans weren't just fighting the Council. They were dismantling it, one system at a time. The Revenant-class battleships became the stuff of nightmares. Entire fleets were assigned to track them down, only to disappear without a trace. Their hulls, once thought to be myths, were now recognized by terrified officers, seconds before they were torn apart by kinetic weapons that ignored shields like they were paper. Every fleet lost, every base destroyed, sent a clear message. Humanity was no longer content with survival. They were ascending, and the galaxy could either step aside or be buried. In the depths of space, on an uncharted planet, Julian Carter stood before the leaders of humanity. The underground war council was held beneath the surface of a dead world, far from prying eyes. Around the massive table sat Earth's most powerful figures, military commanders, political leaders, and scientific pioneers who had been freed from the council's shackles. President Evelyn Ward surveyed the room. "The council is weakening," she said, "but they are not yet broken. They still have fleets. They still have allies, and they will not go down quietly." Admiral Tobias Grant leaned forward. "Then we don't give them a chance to scream." Julian smiled. They all knew what had to happen next. The Council had tried to exile humanity, thinking they were removing a problem. Instead, they had created a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. And now, the time had come to deliver the final blow. The final war had begun. The Council, once the unchallenged rulers of the galaxy, now stood on the precipice of destruction. Their fleets, once thought invincible, had been shattered. Their political alliances, once unbreakable, had crumbled under the weight of humanity's relentless campaign. And now, the Terran coalition was ready to deliver the death blow. The Council's remaining forces gathered at the capital world of Xiphos Prime. It was the heart of the galactic government, the seat of power that had ruled for thousands of years. A fortress planet protected by orbital defense grids, planetary shields, and the last great fleets of the elder races. If humanity wanted to end this war, they would have to break Xiphos Prime. But they had no intention of engaging in a prolonged siege. They had something better. Above the darkened surface of an unnamed moon, the Terran fleet assembled. It was unlike any fleet the galaxy had ever seen. No more outdated Council-approved ships. No more restrictions on military technology. This was humanity, unleashed. Sleek, black warships lined the void, their hulls humming with energy. Dreadnoughts bristling with railguns capable of firing rounds at near-light speeds. Experimental stealth cruisers designed to vanish from sensors even in the middle of battle. Strike carriers loaded with boarding pods, their payloads carrying the deadliest soldiers ever trained. And at the center of it all, the flagship of the fleet, the Revenant Prime. Julian Carter stood on the command deck, staring at the holographic display of Xiphos Prime. "We end this tonight," he said, his voice calm, determined. "No speeches, no negotiations. The Council didn't give us a second chance. We won't give them one either." The order was given. Humanity moved. The Council's final fleet, battered but determined, formed a defensive perimeter around Xiphos Prime. Hundreds of capital ships, thousands of fighters, all standing between the planet and annihilation. But it wouldn't be enough. The battle began with a silence that was deafening. Then, in a single moment, chaos erupted. Human warships descended upon the enemy like predators in the night. The Revenant-class battleships unleashed kinetic rounds so fast they ignored traditional shielding, tearing through enemy hulls like paper. Human strike teams infiltrated command stations, shutting down defenses before the enemy even knew they were breached. The Council's forces fought back desperately, but for every human ship destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. And then, the final phase began. Julian's voice echoed across the battlefield. "Deploy the hammer." From the depths of space, a single warship emerged. It was unlike any human vessel before it. It was the culmination of every piece of stolen Council technology, every experiment deemed too dangerous, every advancement humanity had been forced to suppress. It was the Hammer of Terra, a mobile weapons platform capable of focusing the energy of an entire star into a single devastating strike. As it locked onto Xiphos Prime, the Council leaders realized the truth. This wasn't just an attack. This was extinction. Panic spread through the Council chambers. Some begged for mercy, some tried to flee, others simply collapsed into silence, understanding that their reign had come to an end. Julian Carter gave them no quarter. The hammer fired. The skies of Xiphos Prime burned. The planet, once the heart of the galaxy's greatest empire, was reduced to nothing but fire and ash. The war was over. The Council was no more. Humanity had been cast out, exiled, betrayed. Now they ruled the galaxy, and the stars would never forget the price of their vengeance. The war had ended. The Galactic Council was no more. Xiphos Prime, once the beating heart of the galaxy's rulers, was nothing but a smoldering ruin, an eternal monument to humanity's wrath. The surviving members of the elder races, those who had not perished in the fires, scattered like insects fleeing a broken nest. But humanity had no interest in extermination. They had made their point. Now, they would build something new. In the aftermath of the war, the stars fell silent. For centuries, the Council had been the unshakable authority of the galaxy, dictating laws, shaping empires, deciding the fates of entire civilizations. Their word had been absolute. Now, their banners lay in the dust. What took their place was not another empire, nor a dictatorship. It was the Terran Dominion, and it was built upon one simple truth. Humanity alone would decide the fate of the galaxy. Across the known systems, the shift in power was immediate and absolute. The old trade routes, once controlled by Council bureaucrats, now fell under the iron grip of the Dominion. No goods moved, no ships flew, no colonies thrived unless they did so under humanity's watchful eye. Some species, broken and desperate, surrendered without question. They had seen what happened to those who defied humanity, and they would not make the same mistake. Others, still clinging to the shattered remnants of the old order, attempted to resist. They were erased. No mercy, no negotiations. The Council had taught humanity that weakness invited betrayal. Humanity would never be weak again. On Earth, in the heart of the Dominion's capital, Julian Carter stood in the grand chamber of what was once the Terran Coalition's War Council. Now, it was something far greater. It was the seat of power for the most dominant force the galaxy had ever known. President Evelyn Ward sat at the head of the new Dominion government. She was no longer a mere politician. She was the ruler of a civilization that had reshaped the fate of entire species. Admiral Tobias Grant stood at her side, overseeing the expansion of the Dominion's fleets. The Revenant-class warships were no longer just tools of vengeance. Now, they were instruments of control, patrolling the stars, ensuring humanity's rule remained unchallenged. Julian himself had been offered a position in this new order, Supreme Chancellor of Galactic Affairs. The title meant nothing to him. Only the outcome mattered. He had seen what the Council had done to humanity. He had ensured they would never do it again. And now, as he looked upon the map of the known galaxy, one final question remained. What came next? Not everyone accepted humanity's rule. Scattered across the stars, remnants of the old council still plotted in the shadows, hidden enclaves, rogue admirals, desperate leaders, those who refused to submit. They whispered of resistance. They dreamed of vengeance. But humanity had already foreseen this, and they had one final message for those who dared to challenge the new order. A single broadcast, sent to every remaining faction, every hidden world, every shadow of rebellion. Julian Carter's voice, calm and unyielding. We gave you peace. You gave us war. We gave you trust. You gave us exile. We gave you mercy. You gave us betrayal. A pause. You wanted us gone. You wanted us erased. You wanted us forgotten. A cold, quiet chuckle. Now you will never forget us. The transmission ended, and across the galaxy, the survivors of the old era realized the truth. The war had not ended. It had only just begun. Decades passed. The galaxy, once ruled by the arrogance of the elder races, now bore the mark of humanity's reign. The Terran Dominion stretched from one end of known space to the other, an empire forged not through diplomacy, but through fire and vengeance. The last remnants of the old council had been hunted down. Some had fled to the uncharted edges of the galaxy, clinging to the desperate hope that humanity's reach would not extend that far. Others had attempted to rebuild in secret, gathering in hidden enclaves, whispering of rebellion. But there was no rebellion. There was no uprising. There was only the Dominion. Earth was no longer just the birthplace of humanity. It was the core of civilization itself. What had once been a planet of warring nations and fragile alliances was now the most fortified world in the galaxy, a symbol of absolute power. The skies above it were crowded with warships, orbital platforms, and defense grids so impenetrable that no force could ever hope to lay siege to it. In the halls of the Dominion's capital, Julian Carter stood upon a balcony, overlooking the great city that had risen from the ashes of humanity's past. He was older now. The years of war had left their mark. His hair had grayed, his face was lined with the weight of the choices he had made. But there was no regret. He had done what needed to be done. Beside him, President Evelyn Ward remained as calculating as ever. She had guided humanity through war, through conquest, through ascension. And now, she guided it into an era where humanity was untouchable. Admiral Tobias Grant, though no longer a man of war, still commanded the fleets that patrolled the galaxy's farthest reaches. His forces ensured that the Dominion's rule remained undisputed. Humanity had achieved something no species had ever done before. They had become gods. And yet, Julian could not ignore the whispers. There were those who feared what humanity had become. Not the remnants of the Council, those had been crushed long ago, but within humanity itself. There were those who remembered a time before the Dominion, a time when humanity had fought not for dominance, but for survival, a time when they had dreamed of unity, not conquest. The Dominion had brought order. But at what cost? Cities gleamed under artificial suns. Planets thrived under humanity's control. But fear ruled the stars. No one dared oppose humanity, not because they agreed with them, but because they knew what happened to those who did. And in the darkest corners of the galaxy, in the lawless systems beyond the Dominion's reach, something began to stir. Not an army, not a fleet. A question. Had humanity won? Or had it lost itself in the process? Julian Carter stood in his chamber, staring at the stars beyond Earth's skies. He had fought for humanity's place in the galaxy. He had won. But as he looked at the vast empire they had built, he found himself wondering. Had they simply become the new council? The very thing they had once fought against? A shadow passed across his reflection in the window. Evelyn Ward stood behind him, her voice quiet but firm. "You feel it too," she said. It wasn't a question. Julian exhaled. "We built something unbreakable." "Yes. But is it right?" For the first time in years, Evelyn did not have an answer. Silence stretched between them. Then the door chimed. A message had arrived. Not from a Dominion world, not from an ally, from the unknown. A new voice, a new power rising in the darkness. And for the first time since humanity's exile, Julian Carter felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Uncertainty. The cycle was not over. History was not finished. The future was calling. And humanity would have to decide what kind of gods they truly wished to be.